Hello friends, a very warm welcome to Unsarkari and continuing the process of understanding different concepts in environment. We started with very simple yet comprehensive ideas on environment, ecology, going with the idea of population and different concepts including ecotone, niche, what had been the role of phytoplanktons, zooplanktons and different kind of behavior manifested by different kind of species. We also understood very clearly what had been the role of biogeochemical cycles. So the hallmark had been that you have been able to understand the basic concepts. Again, I am reiterating, so you must prepare your own short notes from these notes and then try to create a list, which I will discuss personally with all of you, of the species, examples, and so forth. Continuing on the same lines, today we are discussing about aquatic ecosystems, and first we are talking about freshwater communities. So the habitat approach, which we discussed, what is habitat, we have already discussed very clearly. It describes distinctive features of the major habitats and their subdivisions, because habitat is in the center. How they are organized, organisms present in each, and the ecological role of each organism in that region. So the identity of the major producers, consumers and decomposers will be forming the part of habitat approach. So Elton says that habitat is definable as an area possessing uniformity of physiography, vegetation, climate or any other quality the investigator assumes important. Not just physiography, vegetation and climate, but much more than that. So four major habitats can be distinguished: marine, estuarine, freshwater and terrestrial. So no plant or animal is found in all the four major habitats. Please remember, no plant and animal is found in all the four major habitats. Indeed, no animal or plant is found everywhere within any one of these. Please remember, very important for the prelims perspective, that you cannot find anyone all the places. According to recent ecological trend, only two major habitats or the more species ecosystems, namely aquatic ecosystem and terrestrial ecosystem, are recognized. That is what we are going to discuss. So aquatic ecosystems, liquid covers about third quarter of the earth's surface. We discussed that only, and it is in oceans or as fresh water. Virtually these waters can contain life in one form or another. That's also we have discussed. Aquatic ecosystem would be important for their sheer volume. And if for nothing else, even now tiny single celled marine plants are the main source of Earth's oxygen supply. This is very important from the prelims perspective. Because most photosynthetic oxygen is derived from these plants. In addition to aquatic ecosystems, what we can say is that uh, when we are seeing different element of aquatic ecosystems, simplicity becomes another way. So they are more simpler than territorial ecosystems, and the reason is that omnipresent environmental factors are there which are setting the tone for all aquatic ecosystems. So their biotic complexity is there, but then water is the single most important factor. It is a medium within which all aspects of the ecosystem coexist, both living and non-living. So what we have discussed in a very comprehensive but simple way, that how much crucial is an aquatic ecosystem and how tiny celled marine plants are the main source. Similarly, aquatic ecosystem is the source of all nutrients. That means water is the source of all nutrients for aquatic life, including the gaseous nutrients, including oxygen, carbon dioxide. It is the medium by which organic and inorganic wastes and sediments are distributed throughout the ecosystem. That is what we have discussed. The amount of light energy reaching community is determined by the way in which light is absorbed by water. Heat properties of water determine how much of the circulation patterns within the ecosystem have major control over the structure of the aquatic community that exists in one place. That is why in the prelims examination, the body is interested in your understanding that are you able to understand the circulation patterns? Are you able to understand the nuances of these ideas? Let's see the subdivisions of aquatic ecosystems. Global aquatic systems fall into two broad classes definable by salinity, that is amount of material dissolved in water, the freshwater ecosystem and the saltwater ecosystem. They are the two ones. So the latter includes inland brackish water, marine and estuarine habitats. Remember this, salt water. Okay, in fact estuary represents transitional zone between the river and the sea, and it contains a dissolved solid content intermediate between the fresh and marine waters. That means on one side you have fresh, on the other side you have marine, and in between you have the one which is the estuary. Okay, the estuarine habitats. Freshwater ecosystem, the study which is known as limnology, are conveniently divided into lentic, standing or still water habitats, and the lotic, that is running water habitats. Both can be considered on an environmental gradient. The lotic follows a gradient from springs to mountain brooks to streams to rivers, whereas the lentic one, it is from the lakes to ponds to bogs to swamps and marshes. So you see, lotic, the one which is running, and the lentic with the one which is you can say standing. So the lentic is standing, that is why we are saying it is including marshes. So I ask you a question, where would the wetland lie? In which system you will put the wetland? Freshwater ecosystems, and when we see the physico-chemical nature of freshwater, the freshwater are of both kinds, that is lentic and lotic, has low percentage of dissolved salt, that is another characteristic, and is subject to the influence of wide array of physical and chemical factors. The rise and fall of these factors frequently affect the fauna, altering their number and diversity, and that is why UPSC asks you the questions, the kind of fabric, the kind of flora, the kind of environment it will be created because of the impact of, say for example, climate, impact of, say for example, polluted water, and so forth. Some of the important factors of freshwater environment are pressure, density, and buoyancy. Very, very important. So the pressure imposed on lake dwelling organism is the weight of the column of water above it plus the weight of the atmosphere. So what is important here to know? Weight of the atmosphere, which you might miss out when you think in a common sense manner. So in all freshwater environments, maximum pressure is much less than in the ocean, correct? And organisms appear to adjust to them readily. The absence of animal life from deep water is ordinarily a consequence of low oxygen supply, low temperature, and not because of pressure. So that is a very, very important fact which you must remember, that the absence of animal life from the deep water, why it is there. Similarly, the density of water varies inversely with the temperature. So more is the density, less is the temperature, and it is directly, proportional with the concentration of dissolved substances. So please remember this formula. Water is most dense at approximately 4 degrees centigrade and becomes progressively less dense as it is cooled below 4 degrees centigrade. Ice also expands markedly when the colder it gets. That is why UPSC always asks you question, that what is the factor behind frozen Dal Lake, but below the Dal Lake, how come the animals and the species are surviving? So why we say that ice expands markedly the colder it gets, because the coldest water is at the surface in winter and the ice is formed there rather than at the bottom of the lake. The ice is not there at the bottom of the lake. In summers, the coldest water of the deep lakes are at the bottom, and the dissolved salts increase the density of the water. So the density of most inland water bodies is much less than of the ocean. That is what you have to remember. It is a direct UPSC question, and when a great evaporation occurs in a lake having no outlet, the lake may come to contain a higher percentage of salts. Think about the bodies. Think about the bodies which are like this, and that is why they are facing certain characteristic changes in the last one decade. Make a list of it. For example, how you will see certain freshwater lakes in India or maybe around the world. So when this happens, when there is no outlet, there is a higher percentage of salts. That is what is called hypersalinity. It is more than the ocean. The few species capable of living in these very salty lakes, for example, Great Basin of USA, include some algae, protozoa, brine shrimp, Artemia gracilis, and the immature stages of flies and so on. Similarly, according to the law of Archimedes, the buoyancy of an object is equal to the weight of the liquid or weight of the water it displaces. So buoyancy varies with the density of water. It is influenced by the factors that affect density. Viscosity. What is viscosity? The measure of the internal friction of water. So viscous. If I ask you what is more viscous, water is more viscous, or if I say certain toothpaste or any kind of paste is more viscous, you will say the paste is more viscous. So the viscosity, which is the measure of the internal friction of water, it varies inversely with the temperature and also influence buoyancy. Very, very important. So most aquatic organisms keep station by swimming movements or have a special adaptation to decrease the specific gravity of the body. So they keep on moving and they take advantage of any turbulence in the water. For this purpose, freshwater aquatic organisms have some swimming adaptations. An examination asks you whether it is fish or whether it is certain kind of other organisms. So clinging organs. For example, in case of animals of lotic habitat, or the following adaptations, what we can see is absorption of large amount of water to form jelly-like tissues, storage of gas or air bubbles within the body, formation of lightweight fat deposits within the body or oil droplets within the cell, increase in the surface area in the proportion to the body mass, which increases the frictional resistance. So David says all these ideas, and these are very, very important points. UPSC can ask you in the A, B, C, D format, or they can ask you in assessment and reasoning also, and this understanding can help you to solve a question. Very, very important concept. Go through it very, very smartly. So when an organism so equipped dies, the special mechanism quickly ceases to function, and that is why the animal will be sinking down to the bottom of the lake or the water body. Let's see temperature. Unique thermal properties of water are demonstrated by freshwater environment. So diurnal and the seasonal variations of temperature are very much evident in these environments than in the marine environments. Diurnal variations range from 4.8 degree to 5 degree centigrade as recorded by Srinivasan, an Indian researcher, scholar and scientist in a tropical pond with an average depth of only 3 meters. In shallow water habitats, difference between day and night temperatures remains more conspicuous. For example, Kodaikanal Lake, do Google it, in South India shows diurnal variation of only 2.8 degrees centigrade. So flowing lotic waters of streams and rivers, they lack such fluctuations in temperature. That means there is more similarity over there. Similarly, the lentic water of lakes and ponds, they undergo thermal stratification, and this phenomena is happening according to season. So thermal stratification has been recorded, or you can say reported, more frequently in the lakes of tropical countries such as Java and Sumatra. In fact, according to their temperature relations, lakes have been even classified. How? They are classified by tropical lakes where temperature is always maintained above 4 degrees centigrade. Temperate lakes where it is varying between 4 and below 4, and the polar lakes in which temperature never goes above 4 degrees centigrade. So please remember these basic concepts and you are able to solve all the questions. You will be able to remember even names of the big lakes, whether they are in Asia or in Africa or even in Latin America or even in North America. Light influences freshwater ecosystems greatly. The freshwater have a lot of suspended material, that we also agree. While affording protection to the light sensitive species, these substances often obstruct light that normally reaches the water. So the degree of obstruction of light influence the productivity of freshwater systems is linked with it. A shallow lake receives light to its very bottom, very true, resulting in the abundant growth of vegetation, both phytoplanktons and the rooted vascular plants. These plants in living or dead states form nice food for consumers, I agree. And then grazing food chain will also be there, or the organisms of detritus food chain, which we have discussed. So a sequential understanding is very important. But running water contains little plant or animal plankton, not due to the lack of sunlight, because the currents which are in always action, they are washing it away. Light controls the orientation and changes in the position of attached species and the nature of growth. It also causes the diurnal migration of planktic species of freshwater. Let's see oxygen. So chemically pure water is biologically uninhabitable. Again a PT fact. And all the fresh water contains an array of chemical substances. The oxygen, which is most essential chemical component of life processes, remain dissolved in fresh waters. So the aquatic environments which remain in the close proximity with the atmosphere contain an abundance of oxygen that reaches the water either by diffusion or by the movements of water such as wave action or water circulation. So lotic, again, moving water of streams and rivers often have high percentage of oxygen. Aquatic plants supply water with oxygen that is formed as a product of photosynthesis. Rooted vegetation of shallow water zones and the floating planktons of open water also produce oxygen. So the amount of photosynthetically produced oxygen remain high at warm temperatures and at great light intensities. Once you understand this concept, recall it on your mind, and once you will be able to solve any question. So the reduction in dissolved oxygen is magnified by the release of many gases and end products of decomposition, or by mixing of waters of low oxygen content reaching the habitat as inflow. Very frequent thing and very good example. In India you find so many water bodies like this. Aquatic animals, with very few exceptions, those that breathe air, utilize the oxygen dissolved in water. Certain freshwater inhabitants, such as many anaerobic bacteria, insect larvae of chironomids, they perform anaerobisis and require no oxygen. Otherwise, it is very much difficult to survive. So, oxygen is the most essential chemical component which is dissolved in the fresh waters. Let's see carbon dioxide. So, aquatic vegetation, Phytoplankton, they require CO2 for photosynthetic activity, and the carbon dioxide of the freshwater environment is produced as the end product of respiration and decomposition. That also we know. Carbon dioxide also diffuses directly from the atmosphere, readily dissolved in water to result in carbonic acid H2CO3, which affects the pH of water. It is also present in the freshwater as carbonates. We have discussed that also, and bicarbonates of calcium, magnesium, other animals. The growing plants and lime deposition of bacteria and other animals may cause a depletion in carbon dioxide resources. So photosynthesis is a major cause of its drain. That means more is the photosynthesis, less of the carbon accumulation will be there. That is what we have been talking about. Plant more trees, have more green vegetation. The higher saturation levels of O2 and CO2 have been found to have toxic effects on aquatic biota. Similarly, streams and lakes contaminated by sewage, the case with India and all developing countries. Stagnant pools with decaying vegetation show an abundance of gas, hydrogen sulfide, which is a decomposition product, highly toxic to living organisms, resulting into complete denudation of bottom fauna. Think about Yamuna in Delhi. Methane and carbon monoxides are other toxic gases which are the products of decomposition, nitrogen, hydrogen, sulfur, dioxide and ammonia, and some of the other gases which are found dissolved in fresh waters. So make a list of all important large freshwater lakes in all states of India and try to see what is happening with Yamuna, what is happening with Chambal river, what is happening with the Kaveri, what is happening with Godavari, what is happening with the rivers and the and freshwater ponds and lakes in the northeast. Dissolved salts and salinity is very important because fresh water being efficient solvent contains many solutes, but even in its salt contains remains little less, or you can say 1 to 5%, 1 upon 5% than marine water, which contains about 35 parts per thousand dissolved salt. That means there is more salt in the marine water. That's what we can say. Different dissolved salts reach water by erosion, inflow, and decay of aquatic forms. Now, dissolved substances have peculiar significance for floating aquatic vegetation and phytoplankton, since these organisms do not depend upon the substratum of the supply of nutrients. That is why it becomes important for them. Compounds of nitrogen, phosphorus, and silicon are most important substances found in dissolved in freshwater. Nitrates, nitrites, and ammonium salts are essential for the food of aquatic vegetation such as algae and water weeds. So everything is happening because of a purpose. Nitrates are always available due to nitrogen cycle occurring between nitrogen fixing bacteria and nitrogen consuming plants. We have discussed in the last lecture. Ammonium salts in excess have lethal effect on the fauna. Dissolved silicates of fresh water readily utilized by the diatoms and sponges in constructing their body structure, such as shell in case of diatoms and spicules in case of sponges. So you see, if this balance is being disturbed, then you can see what is happening because of the climate change, because of the rising temperature. Utilization of phosphorus by plankton during the periods of abundance may result in a total elimination of other plants that require the element, that means phosphorus. Many other elements such as calcium, magnesium, manganese, iron, sodium, potassium, sulfur and zinc are found dissolved in water and influence the fauna in a different way. Iron, being a growth promoting element for plant, exists as a compound of oxygen, that is ferrous oxide, or sulfur, that is ferrous sulfide, in different freshwater bodies. But its influence is modified by the pH of water. Calcium is an essential element for plants, we agree. Abundance and scarcity of carbonate of calcium determine the faunal composition, that also we agree. Deposition of calcium carbonate in water, called marl, this is a key concept, is produced by the activity of plants. External covering of arthropods, shells or mollass, and the tubes of some worms need calcium carbonate. That is why we keep on speaking about corals also in this context. So, due to low salinity of fresh water, animal faces problem of osmoregulation. Because the salt concentration of body fluids of animal remain higher than the fresh water, water continuously tend to enter the body, but it must have been removed. If it is not readily removed, then aquatic animals suffer. That means most aquatic animals like protozoa and fishes, they have means to excrete extra amount of water body by osmoregulation. For this purpose, protozoa employ contractile vacuoles. PT questions, okay. Other multicellular invertebrates and chordates use excretory organs like nephridia and kidney. So you see here osmoregulation in a freshwater fish and a marine fish. So A is freshwater, B is the marine one. If you check out how it is, excreting the salts. See here, this is seawater, this is freshwater, and this is hypertonic urine, this is hypotonic urine. This is what you have to remember. Hydrogen ion concentration, or pH, in the freshwater environments is a determining factor for biota by being a limiting factor. The pH value of different freshwater bodies, it is fluctuating seasonally and annually. So the pH of surface waters and deeper waters is having different kind of approaches. That means they both are different. So Srinivasan sir has reported that the marked pH variations between surface water and the deeper water in Sandunula reservoir in Nilgiris. So the pH range is specific, that means each kind of species will behave in a different way. Yet lower aquatic forms in general showed little reaction alterations in the pH, whereas higher aquatic organisms, they have shown they are responding, or they have shown quickly to little pH variation. They are able to adjust it fastly. So the lentic ecosystems include all standing water, that is freshwater habitats such as lakes, ponds, marshes, swamps, bogs, meadows, and some of the important lentic ecosystems or wetlands have been tabulated in the table which I am just showing you. See, it is here. Very, very important. Very important this table is. Please do go through it, make a short note from the each point, and then you are through, at least with the 2 questions in the prelims, with great confidence. This is with respect to inland freshwater areas, seasonally flooded, freshwater meadows, shallow freshwater marshes, deep freshwater marshes, open freshwater marshes, shrubs, swamps, woodland swamps, bogs, and coastal freshwater areas. Everything it is showing. Do not make it too complicated. Take some simple point and just move on. So the lakes, ponds, and the inland depressions, what we can say is that standing water, lakes, ponds, they are inland depressions containing standing water. They may vary in size from small ponds of less than a hectare or large seas covering thousands of square kilometers. That is how you can define what a lake is. Whereas ponds are considered smaller bodies of standing water, so shallow that a rooted plant can grow over most of the bottom. You can see in the villages in India, most ponds and lakes have outlet streams, and both are more or less temporary features. They may not be perennial in nature, and they are on the landscape because of their filling, because the filling is inevitable. In any case, water will be collecting down if no concretization is taking place. Today we are suffering because the ponds and lakes are vanishing, not only from the cities but also from the bigger urban conglomerates and also from the peri-urban areas. So the aquatic habitats of lake and pond remain vertically stratified in relation to light, intensity, wavelength, absorption, hydrostatic pressure, temperature. For example, in a lake there are 3 well-recognized horizontal strata. Shallow water near the shore forms littoral zone, very very important for PT. It contains upper warm and oxygen rich circulating water layer which is called epilemion, and the littoral zone includes rooted vegetation. Similarly, sublittoral zone extends from rooted vegetation to non-circulating cold water with poor oxygen zone. This is called hypolimnion. Similarly, lentic zone is an open water zone away from the shore. It is the zone up to the depth of the effective light penetration where the rate of photosynthesis is equal to the rate of respiration. And the profoundal zone is the deep water area beneath lentic zone and beyond the depth of effective light penetration. So we just have to understand all these areas, and then we have to remember whether certain kind of species, flora or fauna is possible in certain kind of zone or not, and your job is done. So this is how here different zones of the deep freshwater lake. Please do remember this. And let's see what is abyssal zone. So abyssal zone is found only in deep lakes. It begins at 2000 meters from the surface. Ponds have little vertical stratification. Littoral zone is larger than the lentic zone, and profoundal zone. In a small pond, the lentic and profoundal zones are not found, as I have already discussed this. So lakes differ from ponds in having relatively larger lentic zone and profoundal zone than the littoral zone. So you have to understand everything in ecological terms or in environmental terms. That is the only UPSC is going to ask you. They are going to put the terms which are supposed to be there in case of lake, and they will be using in case of pond. That's all what they can do. So the lentic water of lake or the pond is also classified on the basis of depth of light, that is penetrating ability, or you can say enabling of photosynthesis, into tropogenic zone. Includes littoral plus sublittoral zones, and a tropophyletic zones or tropolytic zone, upper part of profoundal zone. So the former is distinguished by abundant plant growth and the dependent fauna, whereas the latter, that is tropolytic zone, denotes a general absence of vegetation, and it harbors mostly saprobes. In between these two zones, there is compensation level which forms the boundary between the two zones. What are the two zones? Tropogenic zone and tropolytic zone. It exhibits perfect equilibrium between the respiration and photosynthesis. So this is here you have to remember: littoral zone, lentic zone, and profoundal zone. Similarly, when we speak about the physicochemical properties of lakes and ponds, lakes have the tendency to become thermically stratified during summer and winter to undergo definite seasonal periodicity in the depth distribution of heat and oxygen, and that is how UPSC questions come up. Light too penetrates only to a certain depth, depending on the turbidity. These gradations of oxygen, light, and temperature profoundly influence the life in the lake and its distribution and adaptation. Based on the humic acid contents and the lakes of the world, they have been classified into clear water lakes and what we can say is the brown water lakes. So the brown water lake contains high humus content. Clear water lakes may be divided into two types: oligotrophic type, whose water is poor in nutritive material and shows nearly equal distribution of oxygen during summer and winter months, and whose mud bottom contains little organic material. That is what is called oligotrophic type. Similarly, the eutrophic type is rich in the nutrients. At the greater depth below the thermocline in summer, eutrophic lakes show considerable reduction in the oxygen content and their mud bottom is composed of typical muck. Eutrophic lakes are polluted lakes, support the growth of microorganisms. With regards to the above features, an intermediate of lake is called mesotrophic lake. So Mr. Dash or Dash sir have already divided this in this way. Special types of lakes, when we say, there are five special types. That is what terms you have to remember, you must be aware of. First is dystrophic lakes, containing high concentration of humic acid in water, and the margin of these lakes have low pH and developed into peat bogs. Deep ancient lakes like Lake Baikal in Russia is the most famous of ancient lakes. It is the deepest lake in the world. This lake is often nicknamed as Australia of freshwater since it contains various unique animals. It contains 384 species of arthropod, 98% of which are endemic. That means nowhere they are found. Very important for prelims. 81% of 36 species of fish are also endemic. And you can Google further to get the recent updates. Desert lake, when we say desert salt lake, these lakes exist in sedimentary drainages in arid climates where evaporation is exceeding precipitation. The Great Salt Lake of Utah by USA, biotic community of these lakes comprises only those species which can tolerate high salinity, like Artemia, that is brine shrimp. Similarly, the desert alkali lakes, these lakes occur in the we can say igneous drainages in arid climates, that is Pyramid Lake, Nevada, USA, and high pH and concentration of carbonates are the characteristic features of these lakes. So what we are saying is that there are different kinds of arid climates, and within that there are divisions. Volcanic lakes, acid and alkaline lakes are associated with volcanic regions are called volcanic lakes. For example, Japanese and Philippines lakes, these lakes exist the extreme chemical conditions. Let's see the type of ponds. The types of ponds are of four types. Floodplain ponds found in the stream floodplains, quite productive habitat due to a combination of organic matter. Temporary ponds remain dry for most part of the year but support a unique community. Organisms in such pond must be able to survive in the dormant stage during dry pond. That is how they will be able to survive in the normal seasons. Artificial ponds are a result of damming of a stream or basin by men. They are artificially managed habitats. And then beaver ponds, ponds constructed by beaver, that is amphibious rodents, they are called beaver pond. The beaver often does not construct pond but live in the holes in the bank of streams, thus becomes essentially the stream animals. You can see here I have given you the picture of the same. Biotic communities of lakes and ponds, when we understand that different organisms of lentic environment can be ecologically classified based on whether they are dependent on the substratum or free from it. So organisms depending on the substratum are called pedonic forms, and those who are free from it called lentic forms. Further, the aquatic organisms can be classified into different forms and groups according to their size and habits. So Newstone, these are unattached organisms that live at the air-water interface. They may include floating plants such as duckweed, as well as many type of animals. The animals that are spending lives on the top of the air-water interface such as water striders are termed epinstone. So you are not supposed to remember, I would say, if you want to ask me that whether epinstone word is going to come in the prelims, I doubt, but you must know that okay, something of this sort is possible. Other including insects such as diving beetles and back swimmers, which spend most of their time on the underside of the air water interface and obtain much of their food from within the water, they are termed as hyponeustone. So you say neustone. Neustone is the collective term for the organisms that float on the top of water, that is epineustone, or live under the surface, that is hyponeustone. So that is how this term is important. This term may come up. Otherwise, too much technicality is very difficult because UPSC is going to give you in very simple and relatable term, and whether you are able to understand it, it is possible or not, then it will decide whether you're going to solve the question or not. Let's come to planktons. These are forms which are found in all aquatic ecosystems except for fast moving rivers. Except they are small plants and animals whose powers of self locomotion are so limited that they cannot overcome currents. Their distribution is controlled largely by the currents in their ecosystems. Most plankton, that is phytoplankton and zooplanktons, can move a bit. However, either due to control their vertical distribution or to seize prey. Certain animal planktons or zooplanktons are exceedingly active and move relatively greater distance considering their small size. But they are so small that their range is still controlled largely by the currents. And such planktons are known as nectoplankton. So that's what I have given you here. Plankton refers to any organism that is not actively swimming against the water flow. Instead, it floats, it drifts, or it is passively moving in the habitat. Nectonic animals are swimmers that are found in all aquatic systems except for the fastest moving rivers. In order to overcome current, these animals are relatively large and powerful. They range in the size from the swimming insect of the quiet water, which may be only 2 mm long, to the largest animal that has ever lived on earth, the blue whale. You see the range. See the example over here. It is the range which is very important for you to understand. Benthos include the organisms living at the bottom of the water mass. They occur virtually in all ecosystems. The benthos living above the sediment water interface are known as benthic epifauna, and those living in the sediment itself are known as infauna. So nutrients of lentic aquatic environment are different from the one that we have discussed. The water surface of the lake or pond contains several free floating hydrophytes such as Wolfia, Lemna, Spirodela, Azola, Salvinia, Pistia, and Euchornia. These animals, these plants I should say, remain in contact with the water and air but not soil. That is what you have to remember for the prelims. Here the picture is showing in benthos kelp, sea snail, and sea anemones and bat star. So you see very clearly, please do this exercise and try to understand on your own whether you are able to understand the whole thing. Otherwise, if you are not, then go back to the previous slides and the previous parts of the lecture, and then please do write down the key terms, because without that you cannot understand the whole process. Similarly, over here in the pond ecosystem, I am again making a revision kind of exercise. Do draw on your own. Draw on your own in your notebook, whether it is iPad, whether it is notebook. Please try to write on your own that how decomposers and mud at the bottom, and then size and type of soil particles, and CO2, H2O, frog, and so forth, detritus feeding fish, and so forth. Now let's talk about biota of littoral zone. Lentic aquatic life is the most prophyllic in the littoral zone. Most prophyllic. The littoral zone of the lake remains rich in the pedonic flora, especially up to the bottom, to which effective light penetration is possible, which is facilitating the growth of rooted vegetation. At the shore proper are the emergent vegetation, which remain firmly rooted in the shore substratum, but their tops with thin chlorophyll bearing regions are exposed. Certain rooted emergent plant species of littoral zones are ranunculus, monocoria, cypress, rumex. These are some names. Do check out some more popular names also. Interspersed with these plants are cattails, that is typha, bulrushes, arrowheads, and pickerel weeds. Slightly deeper are the rooted plants with floating leaves, such as the water lilies, nymphea, nilumbo, apanjuton, trappa, marsilia. Still deeper in the littoral zone of lake are the agile, thin-stemmed water weeds rooted but totally submerged. So I am just telling you the divisions. Such submerged vegetation includes plants such as Elodia, Bellisrenia, Myrophyllum, Isoids, Hydrilla, and so forth. So you don't need to remember all the names. Again, I'm saying just draw a chart, just try to write down side by side, and one or two examples are more than sufficient. So that is how it is: submerged, floating unattached, floating attached. Littoral zone, submerged zone, floating zone, submerged plants, benthic zone, and your job is done. You are ready for the prelims. So the littoral zone also contains great concentration of animals which remain distributed in the recognizable communities, or in the bottom are various dragonfly, nymphs, crayfish, isopods, worms, snails, and clams. Now other animals live or on plants or other objects projecting from the bottom. These includes protozoans such as Verticilla, centaur, larva of Disticus, lactotrophs, and leech-like Glossophornia. So what you need to remember, not all the examples again I am stating, but you must know that the flora of lentic habitat, how it is featuring, how there are emergent plants, floating plants, submerged plants, water plants, and what are their features. Fauna of littoral zone of lentic habitat, one or two or three common names you must remember always. So the biota of lentic zone, it is a region of rapid variation with the water level, temperature, and oxygen content varying from time to time. So for example, in Himalayan lakes, they have glacial origin. Change in the water level is conspicuous phenomena. The onset of summer bringing forth rapid and sudden rise in water level, that is very true. Various protozoans which are capable of insistment during adverse ecological conditions. For example, tardigrades such as macrobites, rotifers such as Rotaria, Philodonia, copepods, snails, and frogs, they are occupying the lentic zone. Sedentary and slow-moving food forms are excluded from this zone because of predators and lack of permanent stratum for attachment. Similarly, many microscopic plants, what we can say, and fishes, they are also occupying this zone. The lentic zone has autotrophs in abundance. So this is very, very important to see. Once you understand this clearly, you will be able to mark more questions correctly. So biota of profoundal zone, if we understand, the deep profoundal life consists of bacteria, fungi, clams, bloodworms, for example, larvae of midges, annelids, and other small animal capable of surviving in a region of little light and low oxygen. In the profoundal zone, autotrophs cannot produce food, and the main source of energy is detritus that rains out of lentic zone. All the organisms in the zone are heterotrophs, either as detritus feeders or as carnivores. There is no other way. And most of our largest lake fishes, they are inhabiting the dark waters of hypolimnion for most of their lives. In addition to detritus from the lentic zone, food washed into lakes by the river is also going to serve as food for these animals. If we see benthos of lake bottom, so lake bottom in young lakes may be of original rock. In older rocks, it will be covered with sediments, definitely, to form a uniform substrate of mud or sand. Benthos community includes several species of insects, larvae, including those of small mosquito, such as midges, burrowing mayflies, clams, snails, and tube worms. So you see, there is a whole process. What kind of biota will be there of profoundals in? What kind of situation is there in the benthos of lake bottom? Let's see the distribution of oxygen and dissolved nutrients in lakes. The productivity of lake depends on the amount of oxygen and available nutrients dissolved in water. We agree with this. It's a general rule. So littoral zone behaves as normal ecosystem. Oxygen is being produced by photosynthesis within the community as well as being constantly mixed into the water at the surface. This is very important. So productivity within the littoral zone is directly controlled by the nutrient cycling within the littoral zone. Ecosystem and the biogeochemical cycles apparently operate as they do in the terrestrial ecosystem. That is what we have discussed in our previous lecture. So what are sediments doing? They are serving as a storage place for inorganic nutrients such as phosphates and some rooted plants being able to draw nutrients out of the sediments through these roots. But in the pelagic zone, that is lentic and profoundal zone, we have just discussed, the distribution of oxygen and nutrients is exceedingly uneven, and this has profound effect on the behavior of the lake as a whole, especially whose pelagic zone is much larger than the littoral zone. So the epilemian zone of a lake is typically well oxygenated because both production of photosynthetic oxygen in the epilemian zone and because of the oxygen uptake at the surface. So the amount of dissolved nutrients in the water are highly variable, mainly because of the nutrients in epilemian have been incorporated into living tissue. So that means, double things are happening here, double purpose is being solved. The fact that only heterotrophic metabolism is proceeding in the hypolimnion means that the level of production is determined by the amount of detritus raining into it. As the decomposition of detritus releases soluble nutrients, therefore there is an inverse relationship between the oxygen concentration and the concentration of vital nutrients. So it is paradoxical that the greater the productivity of a lake, the lower is the oxygen concentration in its hypolimnion. Very, very important from the prelims perspective. For example, oligotrophic lake, which is virtually sterile biologically, it has low production, but its water remain well saturated with oxygen from top to bottom. Likewise, eutrophic lake has high productivity, but there is a substantial oxygen depletion from the top of hypolimnion to the bottom, with depletion most extreme in the bottom layers. So in most cases, oxygen is thoroughly mixed and is essentially saturation during the overturn. So we have been discussing in very details, but you have to just remember that you must know the key terms and you must be able to understand whether any kind of transmission or any kind of work is taking place in certain kind of ecosystems or not. That is what you have to do. So let's see lotic or the moving water or ecosystems including rivers, streams and related environments. They are remarkably variable in the ranging size from Ganga, Yamuna, Hindan, Kali, Nadi and Satluj, Gomti, Brahmaputra, Narmada, Mahanadi, Kaveri, Krishna, Godavari to the trickle of a small stream. They all are lotic. They vary from ranging torrents and waterfalls to rivers whose flow is so smooth as almost to be unnoticeable. As given river varies considerably over its length, it changes from a mountain brook to a large river, and the most noticeable is the abiotic factor. But all the features of the ecosystem, they are actually responding differently in different circumstances. So what are the characteristics of a lotic environment? Moving waters differ in the three major aspects from the lakes and ponds that we have just discussed. Current is a controlling and limiting factor. Land water interchange is great because of the small size and the depth of moving water ecosystem as compared with the lakes, and oxygen is almost always there in abundant supply except when there is pollution, and that is the whole problem with India. So temperature extremes tend to be greater than in the standing water. Beside these, the most distinctive feature of the moving water are those related in their motion, rate of flow, stream velocity. The rate of flow or discharge refers to the volume of water passing a given observation point during a specific unit of time. It is measured in units such as meter cube per second or foot cube per second or acre feet per second. 1 acre foot is equivalent to volume of water 1 acre in area by 1 foot deep. This can be asked in the prelims. Please note it separately. It tends to increase steadily going down the stream as tributaries join the main river. That all we know. We have read in NCRT that the velocity of flow is the speed at which the water moves, and it is measured in meter per second, feet or foot per second, or minute per hour. What we know is that velocity is variable, but it also tends to increase downstream with increasing discharge. This is a natural phenomena. A factor that may be even more important to the biotic community is the turbulence. Now, what is turbulence? Irregularity of the motion of water particles. Perfectly even flow in which water particles move parallel to one another, it is called laminar flow. It is contrasted with turbulent flow in which the movement of water particles are highly irregular. In highly turbulent water, the erosive power is great, that is very natural also. The shear forces at water sediment interface at the bottom of river are very powerful. And the amount of oxygen incorporated into the water is very high. In streams with laminar flow, the erosive power is lower. Okay, laminar flow in which the water particles are moving parallel to one another. And the shear forces at the bottom of stream are lower and relatively less oxygen is incorporated into the water than turbulent flow. So two things we have discussed, turbulent flow, laminar flow. So the moving water ecosystem can be divided into following two ecosystems depending upon the velocity and the rate of flow of water body, rapidly flowing water and slowly flowing water. So let's see first rapidly flowing water. Fast moving torrential streams can be defined as the portion of stream in which the flow is both rapid and turbulent. Everything that is not attached or weight is swept away by the powerful current. Organisms, sediments, particles, and so on. Think about the flash floods. Think about, torrential streams in a season or an unseasonal rainfall leading to such kind of developments. The substrate tends to be the rock or gravel, which is at the bottom, or maybe it is sticking, and the fragments are rounded and smooth by the water. That also we agree. The habitat itself is an extremely diverse one because the physical parameters such as shear force and the rate of water movement tend to be quite different on the top of rock fragment, between rock fragments and beneath rock fragments, and different species can exploit these differences in microhabitats as we have discussed in our previous lectures in case of habitat and in case of ecosystems. Aquatic plants, in addition to provide microhabitats for some torrential rains. The rarely occurring phytoplankton of rapid or what other word is riffle zone of stream include diatoms, blue, green and green algae, cladophora, elothrix and water moss that is Fontinalis. Similarly, plants inhibiting torrential forms, if we say some animals of rapidly flowing water streams live among the mosses and the flowering plants such as Eriocolon meserum, Hydrolium lichenoides, and Duoria wallishi. Animals inhabiting these plants have a torpedo-like body. Okay, remember this for prelims. Torpedo-like body which enables them to offer minimum resistance to the current. Some animals have funnel mouth tadpoles, for example, Megalophyros, and tipulid larvae live entangled in the root of these plants. What UPSC will do? It is not going to ask you the term Megalophyros. It will say that certain animals, certain species, certain plants, they are able to create such kind of figures, such kind of morphological changes, and we have to visualize over there whether it is possible or not. They are not going to ask you to remember this or to completely mug up the whole technical part. They possess diverse, I should say, devices for fixation and have hydrostatic organs. Some animals such as Cephalopetrix, Helodos, and Phalarochrysaera and Gramarus, etc. They live among leaves and the stems of aquatic plants. All these animals possess hook-like structures. Okay, this is what is important for prelims. Hook-like structures on their body, helping them in anchoring on leaves and stems. The larvae of simulids and chironomids, however, they live on the exposed surfaces of plants. Similarly, if we talk about rock inhabitant forms, the animals that live on the tops of the exposed rocks have an efficient mechanism for staying in one place, otherwise they will be swept away. The organisms in this microhabitat are universally flattened. Some, like the freshwater limpet Fericea, are virtually flat, offering little resistance to the current. They hold themselves in a place with a very large, powerful foot that extends almost the entire area of the shell. Similarly, inhabitants which are forming spaces between rocks, numerous different kind of animals live in the spaces between rocks. Many of them, such as mayfly and stonefly, naiads, are flattened and have certain behavioral adaptations to hold them in place. These includes thigomotaxis, which they do by clinging instinctively to any hard surface such as a rock or other insect larva. So I'm just trying to make you visualize that what kind of adaptations are possible. Rheotaxis, by which the animals orient themselves to face into current and move upstream, is another adaptation of this sort. In many of these naiads, the combination of organism shape and behavior is such that the current presses the insect tightly against the rock. Just visualize that there is a high flow of water and the organism is being pressed against the rock, increasing the friction between the animal and its substrate. Other insect larvae such as Hellgrammite are large and covered with spines. Their size make it somewhat harder for the current to sweep them away, while the spines help them holding the larva in place between stones. Let's see inhabitants occurring beneath rocks. Many species such as flatworms, annelid worm, and insect larvae, clams, and some other species of snails, they live beneath the rocks. The current is weaker here, and the animals are less likely to be carried away. They lack any special adaptation like the way we have been talking about others. So physiochemically, the fast water ecosystems resemble with cold deep lakes. Water temperature tend to be quite low. Productivity is also quite low. Diversity is high. In the fast water ecosystem, the main control of productivity is the current, which seriously limits the amount and the type of autotrophs production that can take place. Now let's see the slowly flowing water ecosystem, which is a different type of system from that of fast streams, because the flow is both slower and more likely to be laminar. We have used the term laminar previously also, and I have explained to you completely what it means. The erosive power of the stream is greatly reduced, and the smaller sediment particles like silt and the decaying organic debris, instead of being carried away by the stream, are deposited on the bottom. In addition to these slow streams that have a higher temperature, consequently uh, planktonic organisms, especially protozoans, occur in large number in this ecosystem. Now this is what you have to remember. This is very important from the prelims perspective. Similarly, the detritus feeding benthos of slow water ecosystems include those which either live on the bottom, such as isopods, so bugs, mollusks, for example, Anodonta dornimata, and mayfly and damselfie naiads, or which burrow into the sediment such as tube worms, naiads of the burrowing mayflies. You have to just understand that, okay, fine, this is happening, and there are different kinds of insect larvae and other kind of clams, nematodes, snails, rotifers, and so on. Swimming organisms are also abundant, including not only fishes, carps, catfishes, suckers, stingers, spoonbills, which tend to be different species from those of fast water areas, but also larger crustacea such as amphipods, for example, fast water shrimps. So what we have understood is that several insects spend most of their lifetime at the surface of the stream, such as water striders, water boatmen, back swimmers, and predaceous diving beetles. These names are important because they can be, you can believe that, oh, these names are actually wrong names and there are no such kind of insects actually exist, but this is there. Zooplankton is also abundant, including a rich assemblage of protozoa, smaller crustacea such as Cladocera, and copepods, or what you can read it, copepods. The richness of food afforded by the slow streams attracted large number of reptiles, water snakes, crocodiles, turtles, and different kind of amphibians. Some inhabitants of the lotic environment includes caddisfly larva, mayfly nymph, and netweed mish larva, as I have just discussed with you. So the plant life is also abundant in the slow water ecosystem. Rooted vascular plants such as pondweeds and grasses, firmly attached aquatic mosses, and large multicellular filamentous algae. Motile algae such as diatoms and flagellates, okay, motile, they can move on, may be abundant in open water. In all, primary productivity of slow water ecosystem is higher than that of a rapid water ecosystem. So primary productivity is higher, and the community is relatively less dependent on the food material from outside because you have time to do so. Like the preparation for UPSC, slow, steady, but consistent. Further, the detritus food chain consisting of organisms such as bacteria and fungi is much better developed in this community, as partially decomposed organic debris that comprises the main food source for these organisms collect in the mud bottom. In Some slow moving streams, in fact, the bottom mud contains more organic material than the mineral fragments. So we can definitely compare it with the fast moving ecosystem. Here we are talking about the slow moving ecosystem. In slow water streams, oxygen concentration remain a main limiting factor. The high level of animal activity coupled with an active detritus food chain can withdraw a large amount of oxygen, obviously, from water of a slow moving stream. That means low level of turbulence means less oxygen is incorporated into the water at the surface. Therefore, the dissolved oxygen content of a slowly moving stream is likely to be much lower than that of a fast moving stream. This is commonly reflected in the fauna of the stream. Fishes tolerant of low oxygen levels such as carps and catfishes are the most common fishes in slow water, while the species with high oxygen demands such as trout, they are found in the fast water. So this is all what we have discussed in the slow water and the fast water, and we have just gone through the whole world of aquatic ecosystems. So I would just say make your own short notes, try to understand them clearly, and go for clarity with certain examples. And here we go to get success. See you in the next lecture. Wishing you all the best and get success with Ansarkari.